today we're going to be painting eggs with watercolor. Now, these are fake plastic eggs. I got them at Walmart. You can also get them on Amazon. They're kind of like a ping pong ball, but with a paper mache texture. So they handle watercolor really well, but you can also use real eggshells, and then you can keep them even if you blow the egg out of it. But I really love using these eggs. The texture is perfect for what I need it for, and I've already done 6 designs in a video that uploaded yesterday, and today we are going to do the other 6 designs in the series. You can use any watercolor paints, and I'm using a small size 2 round brush. If you watched my other egg video from yesterday, you'll know that I'm doing all over patterns, and I'm also doing like a main subject pattern with a simple leaf design around it. So we're starting off with a all over floral pattern, and I was really drawn to the orange in the carrots that I did yesterday. So I thought, let's bring in some more orange by doing orange Cosmo flowers. So Cosmos are so easy. They have jagged petals. You don't need to make them nice and frilly and circular. Just a few jagged strokes really give this flower a lot of texture and personality. For the greenery, I'm starting with a light green and I'm using very light pressure with my brush, doing lots of stems. And then the leaves of the cosmos are very jagged and wild. Cosmos are more of a wild flower. So if you think of the really scraggly leaves that you'll see with wildflowers, those are Cosmo flowers. One of my biggest tips for painting on these types of eggs, even when you're painting on real eggshells, is to use a lot more pigment than you typically do when you're painting on paper because there's not a whole lot of absorption. It's going to react differently. So the less water you have, the better it will stay on your egg and not slide off, and that the color will stay instead of just completely soaking into these paper mache ones. Also, with these type of eggs, you can't really get a whole lot of contrast in your very first go around. So we're going to paint in lots of layers. So I started with a really light layer of orange, and then now I'm going in with a darker reddish orange color to give nice contrast around the center and at the stem for those flowers that are kind of facing away from us. Same thing with the greenery, because we started with a really light wash of green, we can now go in with a slightly darker green and really bump up the contrast, having lots of light values and middle values and darker values. So one of my favorite ways to do that with green is adding indigo to my sap green. So I'll initially start with sap green, and then I go in and add indigo to the sap green, and then I place it in a few strategic spots, kind of in shadowy areas, not overwhelming it too much, but the contrast it gives between the light and the dark is so nice. The key is to add areas of contrast so that the highlights are standing out. So as long as you're not losing your light and mid values, you're doing it right. To finish off the flowers, we're going to add a bright yellow into the center of each one. And it's kind of hard to see, it's not very detailed. And so then I go in with some highly pigmented yellow ochre and dot around the edges just to give it a little bit more texture and to make it look a little bit more interesting. If you ever feel like you're struggling with too much water on your brush, you can always tap your brush onto your paper towel or your rag to release that water and then pick the pigment up straight from the palette. This gives you a higher concentration of pigment so you can do this detailed dot work without it running all over the place. And here's the final design. All right, so for the second design, I'm following the same pattern we followed yesterday, where I do an all over floral pattern, and now I'm doing kind of a main subject. And you probably can't tell what it is yet, but I am kind of sketching out a bunny shape with the yellow ochre color. So it's not very good yet. And if I'm being honest, it doesn't look good most of the time. When you're painting animals, it is a very trust the process moment. So just trust the process. I feel like the sketch looks good, um, but this egg has a lot of moments of looking bad before it looks good. So I kind of gently sketched it out and then I filled it in with yellow ochre. Um, and it's kind of a weird shape. It's not very descriptive yet, but we're going in and adding the grass while we let that dry. And then after I added the grass, I just did a few dots of colors to represent flowers. So I did yellow and a bright orangey red. I thought that was a nice pop of color next to a very brown bunny. After the yellow ochre dried, I knew it was too light. I needed to go in with a darker raw sienna and really bump up the brown color of the rabbit. And again, not looking too great yet, but we are going to add fuzzy details in strategic spots so it looks like a shadow under the head, shadowing kind of around the leg, little bits of texture here and there to look like fur. And then by the end, it looks pretty decent. I would keep the face, if you do a face, very simple. A dot for the eye, a triangle for the nose, and then not do a mouth. Just keep him very basic. And then I added some indigo to my green and did a couple of pieces of grass here and there just to add some nice contrast and shadowing to the grassy areas as well. And then I was like, okay, wait, our bunny needs a few whiskers. And then once I added the little whiskers, he was so cute. And I did like him in the end, but man, sometimes watercolor has the most awkward stages. Gotta trust the process. And then I did the simple leaf design that I was doing on all of those other eggs yesterday. I hadn't done an indigo blue color, and I thought this would be perfect. It felt very Peter Rabbit with the blue. So after we have framed it with the leaves, we are finished with this design. For the third design, I'm doing another all over floral pattern, and I was looking at my flower guide chart that we did together in January, and I saw the cone flowers, and I was like, that's what we need to do is cone flowers. So for cone flowers, you're going to start with the center of the flower, which is a giant cone shape, and we're going to paint it orange because if you look at a reference picture, the centers are dark, but they kind of have this orange highlight. So we'll start with that orange color and then layer the darkness into it. Then we just use the shape of our brush to pull these beautiful pinkish purple petals from the cone out and downward. So the petals they fall downward, they cascade downward versus like a daisy where they would fly maybe more out to the side. These are going to fall downward. So some of these flowers are overlapping. I made them really big and I put the cones next to each other. I knew that that's how it was going to look, but if you don't want them overlapping, just separate them out a little bit more. And so I did some main ones. I made sure to have some main petals and then I filled in the gaps with the other petals. For the greenery, I'm doing leaves that are very similar to the Cosmo flowers. I'm doing a slightly darker shade of green and I'm filling in all of the gaps between the cone flowers because it feels like the cone flowers take up so much space. We kind of need the space in between the flowers filled with greenery. At least that was my perception of how I wanted it to look. Now that we have blocked in the green color, we are going to start layering on some of that darkness for the center. And I'm just going in with a brown, leaving the right side of those cones a little bit lighter with less of the darkness so we can maintain a highlight. Then for a while, I fiddle with the coloring on the petals, adding darker purple, bright pinks, more dark purple. I just really wanted to find a way to have light values, mid values, and dark values in the petals because they were falling a little bit flat to me, and there's so much dimension in the center of the cones. So I messed around with that for a little bit and then I let it dry. And now that the greenery is dry, we're going in and adding the darker contrast for the greenery. Again, I'm adding indigo to my sap green to get this nice dark color. I went a little bit darker and more heavy handed with the contrasting for the coneflowers versus the cosmos, but I think it really fit because the centers of these cosmos are really dark. So I felt like the other aspects, like the petals and the greenery, also needed very dark elements as well. So now I'm going in with a really, really dark brown black color, and I am finishing off the centers. So we have our lightest value, which is our orange, our mid value, which is the brown, and then our dark value, which is the black. And again, leaving some space on the right side for the highlight, so not quite filling it in. And then I finished off the flowers by mixing a dark purpley blue color and added it here and there, but I really felt like this pulled the entire thing together. Now we are doing another main element piece. This is a chicken, and I realized after I did this second one that I was kind of doing an animal theme this time, which I wasn't intending, um, because chicken just screams spring, bunny screams spring, and so I felt like I had to do both. In a very similar way to the bunny, I'm kind of sketching out the chicken, just dropping in colors for the main elements. I wanted the chicken to be a little bit more feathery feeling than filled in like the bunny. So this one's a little bit more sketchy. I'm just alternating browns, golds, like a reddish brown, and doing these quick short strokes to represent the feathers, leaving some white space just because it looks nice when it's not all blended together, kind of gives you the idea that maybe there's a highlight. I left a lot of the area towards the back of the chicken a little bit lighter. Those areas on the chicken tend to be a little bit lighter, have a little bit lighter feathers, and then a tail that is sticking up with a few rounded areas at the bottom of the body where the legs are going to come out of. When you're painting on these eggs, you can still drop in color while it's still wet and get a little bit of a blend. It just needs to be a lot more pigmented than watery, and you kind of have to move the pigments around with your brush. So after I added the legs, I added a couple of lines to represent straw or hay or like grassy areas around the chicken. And then I wanted to put in some really light blue eggs that the chicken might have just laid that morning. My chickens lay blue eggs and I love it. So I just thought this was a nice touch to make it a little bit more interesting. Then I added a little bit more darker pigment on the legs so they stood out against the little grassy areas. And then I put some shadow spots in the grassy areas as well before starting on the simple leaf pattern framing in the chicken. Since the chicken was a reddish color, I decided to go with a green leaf pattern because green is the complementary color to red, so it really makes the red pop. And I thought the green was a perfect choice. It really completed this entire egg. I really like how the simple leaf pattern frames these main designs and finishes them off nicely. Then it was time for another all over floral pattern, and I really love painting buttercups. One of the reasons I was inspired to do buttercups is I was looking at all of the eggs, and I felt like one of the patterns in yesterday's video had some yellow, but then we didn't really have a whole lot of yellow going on anywhere else. So I thought it needed a nice yellow pop of color with the buttercup flower. It's just a very simple, um, five-petaled flower. It's kind of like the forget-me-not, but bigger and yellow and not as branchy. So once I did the light yellow, I went in with a darker yellow ochre to frame around the center of the flower. Buttercups are really dainty and more graceful than the other two flowers we painted, the cosmos and the coneflowers. And so I kept the greenery really light and dainty. The leaves are small and symmetrical, not as rough and ragged and wild. And remember that watercolor is a layering medium. So the first color you put down is not your final color. It is kind of, you've heard me say, you're blocking in the color. We're blocking in our light colors so that we can add on to those colors later. This is perfect for this textured egg because it's kind of made for that layering effect. Another tip I have to paint in this loose, almost abstract style is really maintain a lightness of pressure and do more of a wispy, quick stroke rather than a thought out perfect stroke. With the same sap green color on my brush, now that some of the previous areas of greenery have dried, I'm going in and adding just that same color on top of the lighter color for the areas of darker contrast. Because watercolor is a layering medium, all I have to do is take the same color and layer it on top to get a darker color. So because the buttercups are really dainty and light, I thought that would work perfectly for the greenery. I wanted the centers of the buttercups to stand out, even though buttercup centers are typically yellow. So I did a yellow ochre color, which kind of looks brown, and I just dotted it in very lightly. And I really like how this turned out. Again, very dainty, but effective. And that design is finished. The final design is a main centerpiece design, and I almost went with another animal because I thought, okay, we're already doing an animal, let's stay on the animal train. But I thought, no, we got to switch it up. Let's do food. So I went with strawberries. And I know I've done strawberries on previous eggs before, so I wanted to do it a little bit differently. And I feel like the theme of this year has been intricacy and detailed work. My eggs last year were not this detailed or well done. I'm really, really proud of how the eggs turned out this year. So I thought, let's do strawberries again. So for strawberries, it's kind of a really curved triangular shape. I started with that basic shape in a light wash, and then I added a darker pinky red color on the left side of all of the strawberries, leaving the right side open for a highlight. And then as that started to dry, I went in and just added tiny little marks to represent the greenery. Again, leave a little bit of white space. These marks do not have to be perfect. The strawberry shapes do not have to be perfect. It gives this beautiful aesthetic of imperfectness and kind of a vintage quality when it's not actually perfect. And it's kind of hard to make perfect strokes on these paper mache textured type eggs because it kind of blends out, and so your perfect lines don't look quite as crisp. Then I did a few little lines to represent the strawberry stems and then also the leaves. Strawberries have kind of these wide based leaves that go to a point and they're really jagged at the end. So that was really fun to use those leaves to fill in any empty gaps. And I, of course, added some nice contrast to those leaves, pumping up the darkness of my sap green using indigo. And then for the strawberry seeds, I know they're not pink, but in an illustration, things can be not their real color, right? But I did a few small dots on each strawberry to represent the strawberry seeds. Then I felt like we needed to pump up the contrast on the strawberry. We had a light value, a mid value, and I felt like it really needed a darker value. So just on the very edge of the left side where we already had the shadow, I took that darker pink color we used for the seeds and kind of did a outline that bleeds a little bit into the strawberry. At this point, the strawberries are pretty much finished, but I really wanted to make sure there was lots of contrast on the stems of the strawberry. I focused a lot on the leaves and realized I needed a little bit more areas of contrast, adding just a little tiny touch to each one. Because red and green are already complementary colors, I wasn't quite sure what color of detailed leaf to frame the strawberries in, but I thought a nice pinky purple would look really cool. I almost went with orange, but I just thought it would clash too much with the strawberries. And I'm really glad I went with this pinky purple color. I thought it was the perfect match for this painting. And that is the final design in our second set of 6 watercolor eggs. I really enjoyed painting all of the watercolor eggs for the series this year. I hope you learned so much and that you take these tips into your own watercolor egg projects. I'll see you all next time. Bye.